Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, Crypt, and Nadu have just been banned in Commander. Why were they banned, and what does this mean for the future of the Commander format? Let's find out. We're going to check out the official ban announcement. We're going to see their reasonings behind banning these cards and their future plans for the format. And I'm going to give my initial impressions on the bans and some of my insights onto why things got banned and some further explanations from some of the rules committee. But before we begin, a quick reminder that you can purchase any Magic cards you feel like. Probably not these ones though. Over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. And speaking of prices, I think whether or not you agree with all these bans, I think we can all agree that it really sucks when your expensive cards get banned, because it means not only do you lose access to these cards in your favorite formats, but also the prices of these cards tank. And the prices of some of these cards, like Dockside, Jeweled Lotus, and Crypt especially, are astronomically high. So people realistically can be losing hundreds of dollars, maybe even thousands of dollars if they have multiples in their collection. So that legitimately really sucks, and my heart goes out to everybody who's losing a lot of money with this announcement. That said, while it does suck that expensive cards did get banned this time, I feel like you cannot have a healthy ban list that is trying to focus on the health of the format and also factor in the prices of the cards getting banned. Because at that point, you're just putting the price of the cards over the health of the format, and you could have a very unhealthy format that you can't change to make a fun one because, you know, that would involve banning expensive cards. So I feel like you just can't factor that in, as much as it sucks for people who are losing money. That's before I get into whether or not I think these bans are good or not. I think just as a general rule, if you're making a ban list for any Magic the Gathering format, you need to focus on the health of the format, how much people enjoy playing that format over the factor of money. Okay, so let's check out the ban list announcement. So announcement date, September 23rd, today. Commander, Dockside Extortionist is banned, Jeweled Lotus is banned, Crypt is banned, and Nadu Winged Wisdom is banned. They also have updates on other new initiatives coming forward. The announcement is also highlighting an important event. On September 28th and 29th, the Rules Committee and Community of Cardboard will be hosting the second annual Sheldon Memory charity stream. After Sheldon's passing in 2023, this same team gathered Sheldon's friends and colleagues to raise over $50,000 for cancer research, which is super awesome. We will be starting at 8 a.m. Eastern and running until midnight each day with games, memories, and prizes for you too. We will be starting at 8 a.m. Eastern and running until midnight each day with games, memories, and prizes for you too. For those who don't know, Sheldon Memory is one of the founding fathers of Commander as we know it, which initially started as Elder Dragon Highlander. He was part of the Rules Committee, and he was a very important figure in the community. First of all, for making Elder Dragon Highlander into a popular thing that really took off in terms of popularity, but also as its steward for many, many years, and also just being a public figure and kind of the unofficial face of the Rules Committee to the online community as a whole. The Commander community had a huge loss with his passing to cancer in 2023, and it's really great to see this initiative, this huge charity initiative for cancer research happening again as a yearly tradition. $50,000 for cancer research is insane. It's so awesome to see, and I hope we get even higher amounts this year. So please check it out if you have the time, and donate if you have the means. Okay, now let's talk about the cards. So first of all, let's talk about the philosophy of why these cards got banned in the first place. So the philosophy of Commander prioritizes creativity, and one of the main ways we have historically reflected that in the rules and ban list is to encourage a slower pace of game than traditional formats. This gives decks time and space to develop and do different things. We have a goal to make it easier for players who enjoy slower, more social games to have an environment for them to explore. Commander has always had the potential for someone to get out to a fast start and be the first arch-villain in the game, but that advantage has been balanced by having multiple players gunning for them once it happens. In the past few years, notably since Strixhaven School of Mages, which is 2021 if I recall, so like 3 years ago, we have seen a pattern of stronger mid-game cards that allow the player who skips past the early game to snowball their advantage straight through to the win. Occasional games like that are fine, but it shouldn't be common, and we're taking steps to bring that frequency down a bit by banning 3 of the most explosive plays in the format. Now this to me seems like an update to their ban list philosophy. In my memory at least, I don't believe the Commander ban list philosophy ever really talked about, you know, banning cards based on whether or not they speed up the game and lead to too many snowbally wins before. I think this is kind of like a newer thing. I did check with one of the rules committee members about this specific question, and they said not really. This is not like a new ban list philosophy change, but at the same time, I don't think any other cards were really banned for this reason before. So basically what they're saying is that previously, when you would snowball out of control with a fast mana start, let's say you do the classic like turn 1 Sol Ring play into like a Signet, and then you play like a 4-drop or 5-drop on turn 2. That was balanced out by the fact that multiple opponents, 3 other people usually in a 4-player game, are going to be gunning for that arch villain. So everybody's going to be pooling their interaction and trying to slow down the arch enemy. Like for example, if you Sol Ringed into an early Thraxamundar or like a Mimeoplasm or something like that, yeah, it's like a really spooky start. It's a very scary start, but your opponents probably have a lot more time to deal with that threat. You know, like if I ramp out a fast Thraxamundar on turn 4 or turn 5 instead of like turn 7, I'm going to be attacking somebody, making them sacrifice a creature, hitting them for 7 is quite a fast clock. But, you know, as soon as the Thraxamundar dies or the Mimeoplasm dies, that's it, right? Like the crisis has been averted. But nowadays, instead of ramping out into a Thraxamundar, you're going to be ramping out into a big Atraxa or a Sauron or a Mirim or something like that, where you don't have multiple turns to actually stop the arch enemy. You have precious few turns, and you have to deal with ward many times too. So it makes it so much more difficult to stop an arch villain coming out the gate swinging with a very fast start. It's very hard to stop the snowballing when every single commander these days is an incredible card draw engine, and everything has card draw attached to it or card advantage attached to it and has ward and multiple defenses attached to it. And so that's what they're pointing out here, and I agree with it. Obviously, power creep is definitely speeding up the format, and that means the things that you are fast mana ramping into are going to win the games so much faster than the things you were ramping out before. And that means, yes, you have 3 opponents who can possibly stop you from snowballing out of control with a fast mana start, but the opportunity to actually stop you, the window of opportunity to stop you, is so much shorter now in 2024 than it was in like 2018. And so to stop people from snowballing out of control too quickly, they're cutting down on the fast mana, which enables the fast snowballing. And for those who follow this channel, I obviously agree with this philosophy. I agree with what they're saying over here. I think that fast mana is getting more and more powerful as the years go by because the things we're ramping into on average are just getting more and more powerful and end the game faster. And that means we're having a higher amount of what I would call non-games in Commander, where somebody just has a fast mana start, snowballs out of control, everybody tries their best to stop that person with their interaction, but it's too late. You know, they had 1 or 2 turns where they were allowed to do their thing, and then even if you stop them after that, they're so far ahead on mana, they're so far ahead on cards, or they just outright won the game already that the game is over and nobody else really got a chance to do anything. And that's a problem that just happens more and more often because of power creep. There's just more and more powerful cards, and the things you're fast mana ramping into are just more and more powerful. So I think it makes sense to cut down on the fast mana, which will lead to less non-games. It's the exact same reason why on Commander Clash, by the way, we have a house ban list that actually bans Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, and Dockside Extortionist, along with some other fast mana options too, because we're a show, so we don't want to have games just ending up being non-games where somebody pops off and everybody else tries their best to stop them, but ultimately the game is already resolved by the time turn 2 or turn 3 rolls around. And while yes, Commander Clash is its own beast, it's a show, not just a typical game of Commander. It's a Commander game meant for entertainment. But at the same time, doesn't everybody in Commander just want to be entertained when they play it? So I feel like there is some overlap. Anyway, let's see their explanations for the fast mana cards being banned. So first, we'll start with Mana Crypt. Coming down for no mana on turn 1, it's quite possible to have the explosive start of Mana Crypt into a Signet or Talisman land and another Signet, leaving that player untapping 5 mana on turn 2. In games going over 12 turns, the accumulated threat of damage from Mana Crypt provides a reasonable counterbalance for its explosive effect, but when you are snowballing into a turn 6 to turn 8 win, it's a meaningless drawback. So I definitely agree with the Mana Crypt explanation. I think way back in the day, sure, in Elder Dragon Highlander days, if you were having like a 15 turn game of Commander or Elder Dragon Highlander or turn 20, an early Mana Crypt that ramps into your silly like overcosted Tree Folk or whatever is not very scary. And then later on in the game, if you don't have a removal spell for your own Crypt, you could potentially just die to it because, you know, the win conditions were just a lot worse back then. But that hasn't been the case for many, many years for Mana Crypt. I think anybody playing Mana Crypt is not worried about dying to it. They're using Mana Crypt to just do generically powerful things. I would argue Mana Crypt is the strongest fast mana spell in Commander, even higher than Sol Ring. Sol Ring being number 2, in my opinion. So I think Mana Crypt, if you are trying to cut down on fast starts, Mana Crypt is the most obvious choice out of all of them. Next, we have Jeweled Lotus. It says, another card that can give you 5 mana on turn 2. Jeweled Lotus does it without even needing a good hand. Though you're restricted in what you can do with that mana, 4 and 5 mana commanders can pack a significant punch nowadays, often drawing cards to make up for the one-shot mana, and defensive abilities such as Ward can't be interacted with that early in the game. So this ban is more narrow because not all commander decks can actually utilize a Jeweled Lotus correctly, but obviously the decks that can utilize Jeweled Lotus are going to be just oppressively powerful to deal with if they can be knocking out their commander 3 turns earlier for such a low investment. Again, if you're ramping out Thraxamundar, that's one thing, you know, back in 2011, but in 2024, you're not doing that. You're going to be ramping out your Sauron on turn 3, or your Mirim on turn 3, or maybe your Atraxa on turn 4, and at the latest with a Jeweled Lotus. If you ramped any earlier than that too, you might even get it out a turn earlier than that. And those commanders are just like insanely difficult to actually deal with, even with the entire table trying to stop you. We can even go back further than 2021 too, like the Brawl commanders. Like imagine using Jeweled Lotus and knock out an earlier Chu lane, like on turn 3 or turn 2 even, or same thing with like a Korvold. So again, I think if the intent here is to cut down on fast snowballing games, non-games really, I think taking out Jeweled Lotus is another obvious choice. And then the final fast mana card is Dockside Extortionist. So what they say here is Dockside isn't normally quite as explosive in the early game as the 2 other cards, but it can still go mana positive on turn 2 and start generating substantial treasures after that. It's been on the border for years, and we've shied away from acting in the past because the card has scaled well with the power level of the table, but it's a frequent contributor to the more egregious snowballing starts. Now, this is a weird one in that I don't actually agree it's like fast mana. Like, it can go mana positive on turn 2, but I would say in your average commander game, like casual side, you know, dropping down Dockside Extortion, even making like 3 mana on turn 2, it's like kind of okay still. The problem is with Dockside is that, you know, mid to late game, you just drop down on Dockside, you make like 20, 30 mana, and you win the game effortlessly, and it didn't really matter what the rest of the table was doing so much. Like the mana it generates is so silly, is it crazy silly. In CDH, obviously, turn 2 Dockside, or even turn 1 Dockside, if you're like the last player at the table, is going to also just win you the game because everybody's playing their fast mana, everybody's playing their mana rocks, everybody's playing like their heuristic studies and mystic remors and whatever. So yeah, you're just like almost guaranteed to generate like 8 or more mana off of Dockside on turns 1 or 2 with Dockside, and then yeah, that is fast mana. So I don't think it's really a problem turns 1 and 2 in casual tables where there's less fast mana being played on average. But at the same time, I do think it's like a type of card that a lot of casual people just don't like seeing. Like it is really high on the salt scale, for example. And there's a reason for that. It's just like it makes way too much mana for way too little work. mid to late game, and it just like steals wins from a 2-drop. It's a very silly card. It's a very dumb card. So yeah, I don't think it's the same category as Mana Crypt or Jeweled Lotus. I don't think it's what would normally classify as fast mana or like early fast mana snowballs. But I feel like it does allow for snowballs and insta wins way too easily, especially if you have like any ways of blinking it or looping it from the graveyard, any nonsense like that. Now we get to an interesting part. They talk about Sol Ring and why they're not banning Sol Ring. So here's the explanation. We should also talk about the elephant in the room. We're not banning Sol Ring and have no desire to. Yes, based on the criteria we've talked about here, it would be banned. Sol Ring is the iconic card of the format, and it's sufficiently tied to the identity of the format that it defies the laws of physics in a way that no other card does. Banning Sol Ring would be fundamentally changing the identity of the format. We aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. It happening every once in a while is exciting, and removing the other 3 cards geometrically reduces the number of hands capable of substantial above curve mana generation in the first few turns. Alright, so I have mixed feelings on not banning Sol Ring. On the one hand, I think it's a little bit hypocritical to establish a ban list philosophy of trying to reduce the amount of fast starts with fast mana that snowball into non-games, and then not ban the biggest culprit of it by far, by the hugest margin, like even more so than Mana Crypt, Dockside, and Jeweled Lotus. Sol Ring is in literally every single deck, whereas some decks just don't have the other ones. So if you actually wanted to curb the amount of non-games, these fast mana starts that snowball out of control, banning Sol Ring would actually have by far the biggest impact out of all of these bans. So it feels pretty hypocritical not to ban Sol Ring and then say, oh, it's an iconic card of the format, therefore it has ban immunity. I don't think that's a justification not to ban it. So I don't like the excuse of, oh, it's iconic, therefore we can't touch it. And also I don't like the excuse of we aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. Because, you know, if you banned the Sol Ring one, then you would take out just a giant chunk of all the explosive starts, even ignoring the other bans. Like the amount of Mana Crypt, Dockside, and even Jeweled Lotus starts are a drop in the bucket to the amount of turn 1 Sol Ring starts, which even precons can pull. On the other hand, though, I think that I am a minority opinion on banning Sol Ring. I think the vast majority of community members actually do like Sol Ring and don't want it to be banned. I think like if we did like a poll, for example, on whether or not you should ban Sol Ring in Commander, and we polled every single Commander player from the casual to the CDH, I think 99% of the people would say, or at least like 90% of the people, maybe 90% of the people would say, don't ban Sol Ring, leave it in as it is. And I think at that point, if the vast majority of people want Commander to be a certain way, I think it's important to let that be the case. Like, I'm not going to just force my opinion on everybody. I think the vast majority, a utilitarian approach to this is the best way going forward. Like, I understand that people say Sol Ring, everybody has access to a Sol Ring, not everybody has access to the other stuff. So it kind of evens the playing field in terms of deck building at the very least, that everybody has access to the same, almost one of the most powerful cards in the entire format. I would say it's like the second most powerful card in the entire format, just underneath Mana Crypt. The fact that everybody can have it and it's like a card that's like $2 or whatever is a cool thing to have. I still think it leads to bad games. I think it is fundamentally bad, unhealthy for the format, and I think it would be a net positive to the format as a whole if Sol Ring was just gone. There would just be less non-games happening. However, if the vast majority of people do not agree with that, then who am I to argue, really? Anyway, moving on. Okay, there's one more ban list. There's another ban here, and it's explosive, but in a different way. Given that Nadu has been ejected from multiple formats at this point, it's no surprise that we took a close look at it for Commander. Sometimes hugely problematic cards in other formats, Oko Companions, are fine for Commander, but our observations of Nadu suggests its inherent play pattern is going to cause problems. Part of the problem is the way in which Nadu wins, where it takes a really long time to do non-deterministic sequences that can't be shortcut and might eventually fizzle out. These aren't dedicated combo lines that you have to build a deck around. Dropping Nadu into a normal Simic shell still runs the risk of grinding the game down to a slog of resource accrual. It interacts badly with cards that are staples of casual play, most notably Lightning Greaves, meaning that decks it gets thrown into without abuse, intense, can still create a situation where the player is monopolizing all the time in the game. That's not an experience we want to risk, so Nadu gets itself another ban. Nadu, I think, is not a very controversial ban. I don't think anybody likes playing against Nadu, and it's like they said, it was ejected in multiple formats for the reason that nobody likes playing against it. And the reason is because when Nadu gets to do its thing, it just pops off and takes forever dirtling around, basically storming off, and you can't really concede yet because at any point it just might fizzle out if it gets really unlucky. So it's a miserable card that just kind of breaks time equity. It just makes you hog all the time as you're storming off. It's kind of similar to banning Paradox Engine, where like everything combos with Paradox Engine and you just take a really long turn, but you're not guaranteed to actually win the game. And yes, it also basically combos, pseudo combos at least, with like staples of casual play like Lightning Greaves. So again, another strike against it. That said, I haven't seen any Nadu decks out in the wild. Maybe it is more popular amongst the general population of Commander players than my own playgroups, but I've literally never seen it play. It's kind of like Turgid, you know, where like, I think everybody knows, just don't play Nadu, don't be that guy. And so it just doesn't show up anywhere. But I mean, if it gets banned, I still don't care because I wasn't playing against it before, and I'm definitely not going to be playing against it now. So I'm ambivalent. I don't really care. Okay, and then finally, they talk about how they have a project about how to better communicate using silver bordered cards in decks, more about Rule Zero conversation, and they're also working with Wizards to provide more tools to use in pre-game conversations to help like-minded folks find the games they want. Maybe, you know, hey, can I use my silverboard cards? Maybe that's probably going to be used in tandem for it. Or just, you know, better figure out what power level everybody is at. I'm interested in seeing what they actually do with it. I don't know. We don't have the details yet, but I'm looking forward to see what they come up with. Okay, so closing thoughts. Dockside, Jewel Lotus, and Mana Crypt, I definitely wholeheartedly agree with banning them if the intent is to clamp down on faster starts, and I think that is a worthy goal of a ban list to have, if a ban list is to exist in the first place. And then Nadu, I generally believe, would go the way of like Turgid or whatever, where like nobody actually plays it, and maybe like you could allow for Rule Zero to, you know, allow Nadu back in. I know it saw a lot of play in CDH. I don't know anything about CDH, so I don't know if it was a net good or a net bad for the format as a whole. But it kind of sucks for people who are, you know, using that as your CDH deck, or good for the people playing against it. I don't know. And the same applies for the rest of these cards too. I think that the community that's going to see the biggest impact with these cards being banned is actually not so much the casual community, but the CDH community, where like 90% of the decks were running at least one of these cards, Dockside, Jewel Lotus, or Mana Crypt. Sometimes all three. So I think CDH decks are going to be changed most significantly. But I think the biggest benefit from this is going to be casual Commander, where, you know, people who actually do need a Bane list, you know, not just relying heavily on Rule Zero, which means people playing at a game store, pickup games or whatever, they don't just run into a random Mana Crypt start with a 5 mana commander on turn 2 that just kind of sweeps the game. You know, that's bad experiences for your average player, especially newer players who are trying to get into the format. So I think banning those cards with the perspective of making it better for newer players to find, you know, fun games is the way to go with a ban list. I do think Sol Ring should also be banned with all the rest of these cards. I think it's like the second most important card to get banned alongside Mana Crypt. Actually, it is the most important card to be banned if this was the intent of the banning, is to cut down on snowbally starts that just end up being non-games. I think Sol Ring is the number one card that you should be banning for that. But I totally concede that I am a minority opinion here. I think if you polled the vast majority of Commander players, the vast majority would say, like 90% or above would say, no, keep Sol Ring in the format. And then at that point, I will say, go with what the majority wants, you know? This is not a Commander format just for me, it's for everybody. Now, the flip side argument of this that I've heard online many times is you shouldn't ban any of these cards because some people enjoy higher powered games. Like CDH players, for example, just want to play the most powerful cards. So you're just taking away their toys, and that feels bad. Not just from a monetary standpoint, but also genuinely just enjoying playing Mana Crypts and Jewel Lotuses and all that stuff. So at higher power tables, it's not a problem. And at CDH tables, it's also not a problem. So why are you banning it? You should just Rule Zero these cards out of casual play and lower power play. And I think that's a valid argument if we could just rely on Rule Zero to take care of all our problems, because realistically, we don't need a ban list in Commander, right? Like, if you play with a regular play group, you could just Rule Zero all the things you don't like. Like, oh, this commander kind of sucks. I don't like playing against this commander. Well, that person just won't bring that. Like, we do this all the time with regular play groups. We all suss out what power level we're going for. We figure out what cards we do and don't like at any given time. But that requires a regular play group to do that. Rule Zero really has issues dealing with local game stores and pickup games where you don't know what everybody's own expectations are. Realistically, if we're playing in regular play groups, we don't need a ban list. Like, Commander Clash doesn't need a ban list. My home games don't need a ban list at all. We can play whatever the heck we want because we know what everybody's expectations are and we adjust based on our own personal metas. So then the question becomes, what is the ban list for if not for the regular play groups who do not need it? And I would argue the only purpose of a ban list in Commander would be to help facilitate good games for newer players or pick up games at your FNMs or random stranger games like on Spell Table or conventions, any stuff like that. Because those are the groups of people who actually need it. Everybody else who has a regular play group has already their Rule Zero expectations. They don't need a ban list. So that's my 2 cents on this. So if you are catering the ban list to newer players and to people who are at pickup games of your FNM, I think getting rid of Dockside, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Nadu makes a ton of sense here. Honestly, I would hope that we reached a point that we could all just get rid of the ban list. We don't have to play with a ban list. We can play whatever the heck we want to play because we know everybody's expectations and we know how to match power levels and make sure that everybody's having a good time. But I don't think we're there yet, and I don't know if we ever will be. So until then, I think these changes are pretty good. But that's my 2 cents on the matter. This is very off the cuff. This is just me reacting to the ban list. I wanted to get this video out as quickly as possible. We're going to have a more thorough discussion over on our podcast, and it will be coming out like next week, Tuesday. So we're going to have to wait a while for that one. But yeah, until then, let me know what your thoughts on the bans are and whether or not you think Commander needs a ban list in general. Can we just get rid of it at this point? What's its main purpose? What is a ban list for in Commander? Let me know in the comment section. And until next time, friends. See ya!